Former President Obama issued a new statement Monday on the ongoing violence taking place in Israel and Gaza as the death toll continues to tick up. In a lengthy statement, Obama again condemned the deadly attacks launched by the militant group Hamas on October 7th in what he called an unspeakable brutality. While he maintained Israel had a right to defend itself against the attacks, he reiterated the need to abide by international law. But even as we support Israel, we should also be clear that how Israel prosecutes this fight against Hamas matters. In particular, it matters, as President Bush has repeatedly emphasized, as President Biden has repeatedly emphasized, that Israel's military strategy abides by international law, including those laws that seek to avoid, to every extent possible, the death or suffering of civilian populations, Obama wrote. He said upholding international law is vital for building alliances and shaping international opinion. The former president emphasized that doing so is an enormously difficult task, noting that military operations often put civilians at risk. The attack on Israel has resulted in the deaths of thousands of civilians across the region. More than 1,400 Israelis have been killed, mostly in the initial attack launched by Hamas on October 7th. The U.S. and other countries have designated Hamas a terrorist organization. During the attack, Hamas militants also took more than 200 people hostage during its initial raid on Israel, including many believed to be civilians. At least 4 hostages have been released so far from multiple countries negotiate for their release. More than 5,000 Palestinians have been killed so far in the conflict in Gaza, including an estimated 2,055 children and 1,119 women, with more than 15,000 injured, the Gaza Health Ministry reported Monday. In his statement, Obama warned that a growing humanitarian crisis is underway in the region, citing Israel's move to cut off crucial supplies to Gaza in the wake of the attacks, which he warned could put support for Israel at risk. The Israeli government's decision to cut off food, water, and electricity to a captive civilian population threatens not only to worsen a growing humanitarian crisis, it could further harden Palestinian attitudes for generations, erode global support for Israel, play into the hands of Israel's enemies, and undermine long-term efforts to achieve peace and stability in the region, he wrote. Obama concluded his statement by urging people to reject anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, and anti-Palestinian sentiments. He also recognized Israel has every right to exist, but Palestinians have also lived in disputed territories for generations. But if we care about keeping open the possibility of peace, security, and dignity for future generations of Israeli and Palestinian children, as well as for our children, that it falls upon all of us to at least make the effort to model in our own words and actions the kind of world we want them to inherit, he concluded. This is, from the excerpts, a pretty interesting statement. So I've said before, my basic position is I don't condone the Hamas attacks because I don't support violence, but I also think there should be some sympathy expressed towards the Palestinian civilians, as they are not the same as this fringe group of terrorists in this conflict, that there should be some accountability for caring about them as well. And Obama's statement is, look, there's a little bit of hypocrisy. So when he talks about, for example, Israel's need to abide by international law, you're talking about a president who, when he was in office, took us from 2 wars to 7, in very flagrant violation of international law. And it's I guess what I'm always disturbed by is, like, he can say something and I can sit there and agree with the premise of it, but then because of who it's coming from, because I know that the media will never cover this stuff the way they should cover it, and that's why so many people are ignorant of what he actually did. You can't fully get behind it even if you want to. So where he says, just as another example, it's toward the end, we'll get to that part. The Israeli government's decision to cut off food, water, electricity now, threatens to worsen a growing humanitarian crisis. Like, okay, wait a second, stop the presses. You can't have been the president that got us into being involved with the Saudi invasion in Yemen that saw hospitals bombed, grocery stores bombed, a blockade that starved children. Literally, the worst humanitarian crisis in the world started under Obama's watch, and Trump continued it, and then Biden finally put a wrap to it, even though he still sells weapons to Saudi Arabia. But I digress. You can't do something like that and try to play the angle of we need to be concerned about the humanitarian crisis going on. We need to make sure that innocent people are not. Innocent people died under your watch plenty of times. Like I said, Obama bombed Syria so much he ran out of them. So that part is hypocrisy where he says it could further harden Palestinian attitudes for generations, erode global support for Israel, play into the hands of Israel's enemies, and undermine long-term efforts to achieve peace and stability. All of that is true because the way that Hamas members get built up is from years and years of being treated as, Palestinians like second or third rate citizens. So going after the food, water, and the utilities of this captive civilian population because of what a few bad apples did, is only going to make things worse. And it's going to have like this weird effect where Israel controls everything as far as the government over there is, reigning supreme and can do whatever it wants. But the way it'll backfire is if they actually want a peace deal at some point with the Palestinians, which I don't believe they do, but if they ever actually wanted one of those, it will be it's going to be made harder and harder to get it by virtue of starving these people, denying them of water and electricity, and then expecting them to turn around and shake the hands with the person with the government that did that to them. and global support is, I'm not going to say it's going to erode because the U.S. will support Israel no matter what. Israel could launch a nuke and destroy an entire. They could end every Palestinian, and there would still be American politicians backing them, unfortunately. But you are seeing some segments of American politicians, definitely people in other countries too, other heads of state, who are, we didn't even have to talk about Iran, they've always despised Israel, but it's interesting that he says that because while I doubt the U.S. will ever officially change itself to be anti, Israel in like a sense of, they condemn with more than just words the non-humanitarian efforts that this country's government does, you will see some other governments probably be a lot less open to supporting them and having this blind devotion, which is what we've done for them for so long. I mean, it's nuts. Just the way that this conflict has gone on, the fact that these politicians are so loyal to this foreign government. But I'm at least glad, even if Obama's a hypocrite, I'm glad that he said something that is not entirely pro-Israel. Again, I have no problem with someone saying they think they should have the right to exist, defend themselves, yada yada yada. But I just want American politicians to recognize this wasn't some isolated incident that just happened out of nowhere because Hamas had no reason to be upset. This was a screwed up attack that we condemn, while also being sympathetic to the Palestinians that did not actually commit this act. Which is more than I can say for the public statements of a lot of Republicans right now. They're all doing the Netanyahu hype train, and it's pathetic.